Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We're really thrilled to have you here today for our conversation about climate change and food sovereignty in Gaza. This event has generated so much excitement and interest, and we're really thrilled to have our speakers today to bring you this timely conversation. I'm Sandra Tamari. I'm the Executive Director of the Adalah Justice Project, and we're thrilled to be teaming up with the American Friends Service Committee to bring you this series of conversations about Gaza to dig a little bit deeper into the economics, the politics, the psychology of everything that is happening in Gaza as we enter into year 16 of this terrible siege and blockade. We at Adalah Justice Project run the Gaza is Palestine campaign, and AFSC has been running the Gaza Unlocked campaign. And we really are doing our best to dig deeper and bring attention to Gaza. The Palestinian falahin and the land are the foundations of our society. And as one of our guest speakers today, Mohammad Abujayyab, explains, a falah is more than a farmer. The Arabic root of falah means the act of becoming. And so as he says, every season we come back again to be who we are. The Palestinian connection to the land is essential. And in fact, it is our essence. And Zionists knew this. Early in 1937, David Ben-Gurion said, in many parts of the country, new settlement will not be possible without transferring the Arab falahin. Last May, Asmaa Mezied, our second esteemed guest today, kept a daily war journal from Gaza. And she wrote, the targeting of streets, agricultural lands, schools, and residential buildings is not haphazard. It is intentionally taking away all that constitutes life in a place that the Zionists systematically have made lifeless for decades. The environmental devastation that the Zionist endeavor is raining down on Palestinians is not a footnote in the colonial project, but rather a key feature. And that's why today's talk will focus on food sovereignty rather than food security. That is why Gaza is a political dilemma, not a humanitarian disaster. That is why Gaza is Palestine. I have two special announcements to make before I hand over the mic to our panelist. The amazing Visualizing Palestine, a group we admire very greatly here, has done it again with a timely and informative graphic on food sovereignty in Palestine. And today we are honored to offer you a sneak preview of this graphic that covers issues from restrictions on water use, that talks about the restrictions on foraging of our native herbs, like Yaqub and Zatar, and really digs into what it means to have food sovereignty. So we're thrilled. This graphic is just a sneak peek. The official graphic will be released on Monday, May 9th. And we encourage you to subscribe to the Visualizing Palestine newsletter and to follow them on social media. We'll drop links in the chat in just a moment. And we're just excited that this is coming out at this time as people are paying more attention to Palestine and climate change. And secondly, I'd like to announce that the spring 2022 issue of Science for the People is titled The Soil and the Worker, a name derived from Marx's description for the original sources of all wealth. The issue discusses food, agriculture, land, and labor from an internationalist lens, and a significant portion of the issue is devoted to Palestine and the greater Arab world. We are thrilled to be offering an offer for digital and print subscriptions. We're going to drop a link. And if you are able, we encourage you to subscribe because we would like to support this kind of work. So thank you. Finally, we are recording this event and we will send out a link to our entire list that we hope you'll share widely. And we'll include information about Visualizing Palestine and Science for the People in that email. And so with no further delay, it is my deep honor to introduce to you my friend and colleague, Jehad Abusalim, who is Education and Policy Associate at the American Friends Service Committee, who will be moderating this exciting talk. Thank you, Jehad.
Thank you so much, Sandra. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to today's event entitled Land, Climate Change, and Food Sovereignty in Gaza, which is part of a series of events about Gaza brought to you by the Gaza Unlocked campaign of the American Friends Service Committee and the Adalah Justice Project. I am Jehad Abusalim, the Education and Policy Coordinator at the Palestine Activism Program of the American Friends Service Committee. I am delighted to be here with Asmaa Abu Mezied and Mohammad Abujayyab. Asmaa and Mohammad, thanks for joining us. Asmaa Abu Mezied is an economic development and social inclusion specialist working to address issues of gender, development, and climate change in the agriculture sector. Her research interests focus on the care economy, women's collectives organizing in economic sectors, the private sector's social accountability, and the intersection of Palestinian agricultural and political, agricultural, and environmental identities. Mohammad Abujayyab is a Palestinian fallah, farmer, and food sovereignty activist. He is a co-founder of Sulayman Farm in 2015 in Bil'in in the West Bank, and one of the collaborators behind Al-Baraka Wheat, a 2019 project in Jordan. His upbringing in a refugee camp in the Gaza Strip has made issues of belonging and social justice a central theme in his work. He is a co-developer of a farm-based political and educational framework. Asmaa and Mohammad, welcome again, and thanks for joining us today. I would like to start with Asmaa. We tend to talk about the Gaza Strip in general terms. Many know that there is a blockade, that Gaza has one of the world's highest population densities, and that many things are limited in Gaza, including land. But we rarely delve into the details of what it means for more than 2 million people to live in such a small space. After all, the overall area of the Gaza Strip is around 140 square miles, 365 square kilometers. And we rarely talk about what it means for people to engage in agriculture in Gaza and what challenges they face. So can you tell us a little bit about the agricultural scene in Gaza, and why is it important to think about agriculture there as part of our political analysis of the situation in Gaza and in Palestine in general?
Thank you, Jehad, for having me today. And I think to talk about agriculture in Gaza particularly, the first thing that comes into mind is the systematic challenges that face farmers, women and men farmers in Gaza, whether it's, the problems in terms of climate change, or the challenges that comes into the daily worry of the farmer in terms of production and what can happen to the yield that they farm, and the prices within the market, and we can dive into a huge list of challenges that could look very technical from the surface, but really looking at each of these challenges and diving deep into them, you will understand how politicized, how political these challenges are. For example, when we look at Gaza, even before 1948, and Gaza, as it was used to know, it was not only limited to the Gaza Strip. Actually, Gaza Strip was a very small proportion from what has been known as Qada Gaza at that time. And if you look at that reality of Gaza at that time, and the amount of agricultural labor that used to be done, the products that used to be produced, particularly in terms of barley and wheat, and the exportation of these products, and how it's relevant to people's daily life, how it was a fundamental part of their identity. And then when you look at agricultural now and you see how over the past few centuries, like the past few decades, there has been a huge gap in the detachment that Palestinian in Gaza has had to the land, and it's a very natural in terms of. It's very natural if you look at what kind of systematic processes has the occupation put in place to ensure that this detachment and that gap is widening every single day. In the past, agriculture has been part, as I said, from the identity. It was not an act of, income generation by itself. It was an act of like building social cohesion. It was an act of like, coming together and also having a national identity. But now agriculture has been reduced to only a labor that you can do in order to have an income. And even the occupation has systematically made that income that is coming from agriculture as not something that is sustainable. And that's why we see a lot of young people leaving agriculture. And I keep saying that if we look at our older generation, like my grandparents, your grandparents, for them to sell a land for living was not even a question. Like it was a red line that nobody even tried to think about it. But now the political and the economic collapse within Gaza is pushing people to the point that they would sell a piece of land because they have nothing to eat, and that kind of put a lot of people into a trip of guilt towards to what extent I am having to make a choice between survival, but also between like feeling that I have failed my identity, my Palestinian national, even participation. And looking at Gaza, what we are seeing is the agricultural spaces is diminishing. You were asking me about my village, Zawaida. It's a small village in Gaza, and you asked me about whether it's as green as always, and unfortunately it's not. And it's really something that pains me and pains a lot of Palestinians, that we are no longer seeing the green areas that we used to see. We are no longer seeing the trees that used to decorate the streets, that had like so much memory in it, that was also spaces for Palestinians to hide when they were fighting against the occupation, and also a symbol of their existence to the land.
Thank you so much, Asmaa. And hearing some of the things that you said made me really think. I personally am from Gaza originally, and although I've been away for a decade, I personally don't know what the state of access to food is like in the Gaza Strip today. How much of what is being produced in Gaza comes from Gaza and how much is imported from the outside. So this is something, and how much of the agricultural production in Gaza goes into products that are exported to the outside markets. But we'll get to that point shortly. I would like to talk to Mohammad a little bit about the notion of food sovereignty, which Mohammad, you center this notion in your work in a consistent manner, and I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about what does food sovereignty mean in the context of the Palestinian struggle for liberation in general, but also in Gaza's context, as part of Gaza's struggle for survival, but also as part of Gaza's grappling with some of the issues Asmaa talked about, including access to very limited natural resources, mainly land and water, and this diminishing agricultural space. So how can we talk about food sovereignty in light of all of these factors?
Thank you, Jehad. Thank you, Adalah. Thank you, AFSC. Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Asmaa, for being here. It's actually really lovely to see people from a very small area, like from the middle area of Gaza Strip. They from all our neighbors, Jehad and Asmaa. The topic, I feel like, of food sovereignty, it really has a lot of tentacles to it and so on that are very, very different than the topic of food security that I feel like has turned so many of us and the population in Palestine and so on to just mere numbers, and mere calories and macro and micro sort of nutrients that basically, they do accounting for whether the occupation or UNRWA, and that is about it. But like food sovereignty is really about the choice, the production and consumption cycle, or basically of food, of culturally relevant foods that happen to be relevant ecologically, happen to be relevant culturally, happen to be relevant economically. So it's and the intersection between this topic and Gaza Strip as current experiment, and probably one of the most important liberation experiments that we had in our Palestinian history, one that gets dismissed or put in a square usually, or a box that just limits it to certain events, or like, the sort of crisis attention cycles, while sovereignty in general as a topic or as an experiment, as something that we seek, and usually it's something that we look at as, that basically there's this resistance phase that we go through, and there's this sovereignty phase of building, a national character or a view of self that we go through. But in these long running struggles, we can't afford to actually relegate it to a later stage. We can't do that. Indigenous folks here in the US cannot do that. Black Americans cannot do that. So we end up basically having to entangle our struggles, our resistance, that is basically the frameworks and sensibilities, and our intuition in our resistance stage is very different than our intuition in the sovereignty stage, where we actually need multiple experiments. We need to explore who we are and our character and what we do and what we like and what we don't like, what is relevant to us and what's not relevant to us. And this intermingling overlap of these two experiments and so on make it very difficult actually to go and weed through, especially with these efforts of aborting or basically of funding certain parts or certain parties of the Palestinian liberation movement in general, since it's really spread on a spectrum. And basically that becomes a sort of a sabotaging effort to basically the rest of the sovereignty effort. So we've been in a way, in Gaza Strip, we've been surrounded by this real difficult siege since 2007. But at the same time, we've been afforded this experiment that we're paying dearly for. It's true that we're that basically on the general politically correct sort of spectrum that we're seeing, that Palestinians coming back together is basically the path that we're looking for. But in a sense, that relegates us to a lower bar in a sense of liberation, where Gaza has actually had taken strides forward since 2007, while we see the politics in the West Bank being stagnant around pre-2007 politics, and the PA making efforts of resistance and so on that actually push our society forward and push our efforts of sovereignty forward, sort of basically locking them in the same box pre-2007. And that was actually pretty self-evident when I was in Gaza in January. Did a lot of the work and sort of had a chance to meet with a lot of people and see and be in touch with a lot of these really dear experiments that we needed to go through. And one of them was meeting with Dr. Mohammad, the ex-Minister of Agriculture that was basically there in the period 2006 and 2012. And he passed one of a printed copy of the strategy of the Minister of Agriculture to me. And just the going through certain things and going through actually chapters that talk about like resistance agriculture as part of a 10-year strategy for Gaza Strip and so on is one of the most uplifting, and actually seeing effects of it on the ground, seeing effects on it on watermelon agriculture, on fisheries, on olives and so on. Hopefully we'll get a chance to talk about this kind of production and so on. So sovereignty is basically this kind of basically self discovery that we really need to engage in our efforts. That goes beyond just production, that goes beyond, you know, that food sovereignty is this marriage between what we care about in land and so on, and what we care about and what's relevant to us in culture. This could produce this space of work that we need, you know, that we need in a sense to elevate our agency and our voice, you know, in our livelihood.
Thank you so much, Mohammad. This is great, and I'm sure the people in the audience are interested in hearing more about your recent trip to Gaza and your discoveries there. But let me, you know, circle back to putting Gaza, to providing a little bit of context so that we can talk more about Gaza's present. You addressed the past a little bit, you talk about the present, but let's talk a little bit about the future and conversations about the future today, whether in Palestine or elsewhere, cannot happen without talking about climate change, without talking about how societies will provide for themselves. Just to repeat what I said earlier, the Gaza Strip is a very small geographic area. It's the total area of the Gaza Strip is 140 square miles. That is equivalent to the total area of metropolitan Detroit. But imagine metropolitan Detroit as an area that is isolated from its surroundings. So there is no access to further land beyond the confines of this blockaded metropolitan Detroit. Okay, so there are 2 million, more than 2 million people now who live in the Gaza Strip, and by 2050, this number is expected to double. The rate of population density now is around 6,000 plus per 1 square kilometer. We're talking about 13,000 per 1 square mile. By 2050, the population density in Gaza will be around 35,000 human beings per 1 square mile. What are the conversations? How are people going to survive? We're talking about a huge growth of population in a very limited area. How are people providing for themselves now, and what will happen in this very near future? I mean, to put 30 years in perspective, it's been 30 years since Oslo. So Asmaa, what is the discourse? What are some of the conversations around the future of land and agriculture and food in Gaza today? And what are some of the projects that are happening to address that?
Thank you, Jehad. I think you've touched upon the climate change, and it's important to understand how climate change is affecting people in Gaza and Palestinians in Gaza. Now, what we are seeing is diverse impact when it comes to climate change. So you will have like very clear-cut impact of having extreme heat waves that affects both like agriculture, but also affect the population. And you've mentioned the population density, Jehad. And if you walk in the summer during these heat waves in the Palestinian camps that exist in the Gaza Strip, what you will see is so much, considering also the electricity cuts, you will see so much problems that people are facing and children are facing from like skin diseases due to heat, but also from like food spoilage because there is no electricity so that people can store their food into their fridge. And that's very problematic because the Palestinian family in Gaza cannot do like purchases in bulks because there has to be electricity so that they can save. So they cannot save on the little money and the income they have by purchasing in bulk. What they have to do is do daily purchases. And the daily purchases of like foods and vegetables and fruits in order to survive the electricity cut, it means that there is no way of saving from that income. So you are either between like financial burdens or like between more expenditure that is spent onto food. And we are seeing how Palestinian families as part of coping mechanism are utilizing a lot of like instant food, like the amount of noodles, and during COVID, noodles was one of the main products that has a huge purchase in the Palestinian Gaza market that has been produced because it's cheap. It's very instant and like it can like make a person who's hungry like feeling a bit of satisfaction in terms of food. So you have that kind of impact on family, but also you have a collapsed health system. So even if you are facing a lot of like heat-borne diseases like with your children, what kind of health sector that can absorb or even support families in navigating these diseases? And that's only on the family level. But if you want to look at agricultural level, what we are seeing with the heat wave, and this year we will see it particularly in the palm trees and in the olive trees, studies that has been conducted are showing the huge impact, adverse impact on olive, on grape that has been part of Gaza signature for like centuries, Gaza grape, and like that also goes into history books about how amazing the quality of the grape. Now, considering that, while also looking at the water issues in Gaza, so in the southern area in Gaza, we have high water salinity, more likely to have droughts in like areas like Rafah. So what we are seeing is that huge farms of grape, huge farms of stone fruits are currently dying because there is no other alternatives like the water salinity, the heat wave, and the whole agricultural scene in Gaza is not prepared in terms of like, adopting high-tech, let's say, technologies that can fight with the water salinity. And to look at that, one last example, to look at how the occupation is adding into this is something very important. So you know that recently there has been, after 4 years and a half, building the smart fence across Gaza that goes underneath Gaza and like on top of Gaza. Yes. Now that fence, it's actually going 30 meters underground. And that affects a lot, like the amount of water aquifer or even water slide into the Gaza aquifer. So any kind of recharging to that aquifer, considering the high demand in water for domestic as well as for agriculture, is going to have a long-term impact. So if you visit Gaza now, you will see very diminishing spaces of grape, of olive, of palm trees, and a high dependency on vegetables and high-end.
It seems like we lost the connection with Asmaa.
Yeah.
Asmaa, are you here? Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
You froze briefly. And the last thing we heard from you was you were talking about the diminishing space of grape and olive
yes.
trees. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm sorry, the internet, I'm functioning on solar energy now. So, what we're seeing is that really farmers have to adopt with the needs to produce, but also like, you know, that water salinity, the increase in type of diseases. So the alternative is dependency on pesticides that is also imported into Gaza. So in terms of like sustainability in the next 30 years, the picture is very bleak. I'm not sure if we will have like enough water and natural resources that we actually do not control, but also to what extent, considering the high population, we will still have agricultural areas in the Gaza Strip, considering that the access restricted area, which is existing in the eastern part of Gaza, it's not allowed to be fully utilized. And it is the most fertile agricultural land that exists in Gaza.
And this is near the buffer zone to the east?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Mohammad, if you have anything to say about this, we would really appreciate it.
It's just putting it in context, and this is the extraordinary nature of Gaza Strip, is that basically we have a population in Gaza Strip now that is more than the estimated population of historic Palestine pre-48. And if you're looking at basically the available lands for this area, the 170,000 dunams, and it was said to be expanded after Israelis emptied the settlements in Gaza Strip to 190,000. If I'm putting this in context, this is 1/5 of the lands that were planted with wheat in historic Palestine. Just field crop, a single field crop, was 5 times bigger than the amount of land that is available for people in Gaza Strip. And so this actually creates this huge challenge, like for people feeding themselves, and actually because it is carved out as this separate political identity that has no chances of surviving on its own. It's really important to see like how limited, and as we just mentioned, actually 30% of these lands are around the buffer zone where it has restricted access, where people cannot really use it freely the way that you could, if a war happens, you lost your crop, and it's challenging because as well, the south of Gaza gets half of the rainfall that the north of it, like Rafah and Khan Younis, where a lot of these agricultural lands are, can't really be without irrigation. And to quote some of the Palestinian Authority, like basically even in the 2000s, it was believed that Israel, when they left Gaza Strip in '94, they haven't even left like water to be used, like good water to be used in Gaza Strip, because a lot of the agriculture, and this is the extraordinary part about the agriculture in Gaza Strip, like this 6% of Palestine, of the Palestinian territory area, basically of the West Bank, Jerusalem, and Gaza. Gaza is just a 6% of this entire area, but produces the cash yields, the crop cash yields, the Gaza Strip go upwards of 25 and 30% of the entire cash yields of the Palestinian authorities. So this actually begs the question: how does this happen? Like this extraordinary nature of the agriculture in Gaza has been always geared towards producing vegetables for Israeli market, because until today, 10 years ago, it has been the same thing, that basically you can pay 20 shekels, which is like $5 or $6 like for a day for an agricultural worker, while they can command 10 and 20 times that amount in Israel. So you get basically these cheaper crops that can be exported in lieu of cash. So the agriculture in Gaza has been concentrating on this vegetable production that produces enough cash for people to survive, because it doesn't make any sense for them to produce wheat. There is no enough land to feed themselves. So we end up basically importing on the entire, if we project that conversation, the entire area, like West Bank and Gaza as well, like we don't have, it's estimated to be 1.5 to 1.9 million dunams, which is as well equivalent, a little bit more than the amount of lands that we planted with wheat in prehistoric Palestine. So you know, we can't even plant our own wheat in the territories, the entire area in the West Bank and Gaza. So the whole equation doesn't really add up, you know, and the way it's been affecting, particularly water in the aquifer in Gaza Strip, goes back even to the 90s, not from today. So I just cannot forget when I was heading out of Gaza and we're in Rafah borders, and I headed out to the washroom to wash, and I just tasted the water that came from the tap, and it was like seawater was coming out of the tap with the tap water. It's impossible, and this is the feeling that you get across multiple areas of Gaza Strip, and including Deir al-Balah, including other areas where basically irrigation is used for certain things like olive production and palm production. And these crops are actually saline, they can resist a level of salt in the water and so on, but the heat wave, as Asmaa was mentioning, last year, Gaza had to import, like 2 years ago, Gaza actually was experimenting with exporting some of their olives because of this whole experiment of planting olive trees in Gaza that actually produced enough oil in 2019 to, you know, to cover Gaza Strip's needs and to be able to export it. But last year, and that was actually the effect of the heat wave, that was very unlikely in Palestine to have 2 bad years of olive production. And 2020 was bad. 2021, we produced 35% of the yield that was there in 2019. And that was just a straight result out of basically environmental impact of the heat wave.
And Jehad, if you allow me to build on Mohammed's point, Mohammad talks about like how in Gaza, it is necessary to produce actually cash crops because that's the only way of like, you know, having income. But even the choices of like what cash crops to produce, it's not even Palestinian decision. If we look at, you know, Gaza is usually associated with strawberries. If you look at the strawberry, it's a complete example of, you know, colonial agriculture where even a strawberry production in Gaza was very influenced by Israel, the strawberry and flower, because they want to enter international markets and they want to have products entering that. So Gaza was like basically the testing grounds where, as Mohammad mentioned, it's very cheap labor, but also the environmental impact on the water aquifer was a risk that Gaza should take, not like the Israelis should not take. And while they were testing on what's the best way to produce a strawberry that meets international markets but does not damage the environment. So until they had a brand or they already had like a market share in European markets and international markets, and they succeeded in producing a strawberry that does not, you know, harm the environment for them, then they decided to, like, you know, mitigate the amount of strawberry and flowers that is being produced in Gaza or being actually traded outside Gaza. And the past 2 years, we are seeing Jehad, the flower farmers are actually throwing these flowers to the cattle because it's not even profitable to sell it in local markets. So it's easier to have it like fodder for cows and goats rather than selling it into the market. And that's not something happening in haphazard, something that is very planned for in order to create a class of Palestinian who suddenly have an increased income because of like new cash crops that is being piloted. And then like once they reach to the point where like there is a thinking of like, you know, shifting to other alternative agricultural, that kind of like income sources being stopped.
And I remember that, I mean, also like looking at the history of agriculture in Palestine, people romanticize the citrus, you know, trees, and there is a long history to how, you know, the citrus played a positive role in our history, but also had negative effects on the Palestinian economy. And, you know, I grew up hearing my father saying that my grandfather, who had a large citrus grove and who used to go and sell his produce in Jaffa, after 48, he ended up basically struggling, not knowing, with the Egyptian market didn't have the same amount of demand that international markets that they used to export to through Jaffa. And then after 67, they uprooted the citrus trees to replace them with greenhouses to basically, address demand from Israeli markets. So the history goes, back to even before 1948. I still have many questions, but there are questions from our members of the audience. So if you don't mind, I will read some of the questions, and please feel free to either of you to answer them or to add. So we have a question from Rawan Qaddura about the issue of class divisions, which I think is very important. So basically, the question is about how does food sovereignty and material realities shift between classes in Gaza, and how do electricity cuts impact lower class Gazans versus upper class ones? I don't know, how do we approach this question, given that some struggles can be universal, but also there are really there are huge discrepancies in people's access to these things. So I see, Mohammad, I see that you unmuted yourself. So if you'd like to answer this question.
Yeah, I'll quickly, I don't know if somebody was marking that they want to answer this as well. We have to note, and this actually goes to Asmaa's comment in the beginning, that Gaza Strip is just a sliver of what Gaza used to be. It's actually a sliver that is taken from both Beir Saba and Gaza Strip. Majority of farmers in Gaza Strip have no access to land. They come from Fallahin, basically they're refugees. Majority, and this is a very long and very important, and this actually has happened in the past to be an entry point for a lot of the politics in it. And with the British were around, when the Israelis as well have tried to utilize that gap, that lack of social justice sort of gap. In the shadows or underbelly, in the sense of an occupation, a lot of layers of social justice go missing, because it's very hard to actually attempt to solve them, and becomes that basically breeding ground to dissect and break Palestinians even further. And that was like a topic of Hizb al-Zurra and Rawabit al-Qura and so on, actually to create that sort of gap between the rural and urban sort of communities, leadership, and so on in Palestine. But Gaza Strip, like even today, 10% or so, maybe 15% today, host almost half of the population of Gaza Strip. If we're talking about population densities and so on, if we count or we look at the refugee camps and their population sizes and so on. I live in Maghazi refugee camp, and I'm there, our neighbors in Zawaidi. When I was a kid, I remember walking over to Zawaidi, and I was like astonished as a kid. It was like, wow, there's so much space here, not as many people. Like, why, what gives? Like, why is it in the camp different? Why is it so populated and so heavily populated and so on? And yeah, the distribution of lands and where people live, and especially in Gaza Strip, gets to the extremes, like in Jabalia refugee camp, where the population goes way beyond the 15,000 mark per square mile. So it becomes this. We have big gaps in social justice and the distribution of even access of food, access to land, access. If you go to the north to Beit Hanun and Beit Lahia, where people have access to these lands and they can work and produce cash crops and sell them, you'll go south and you'll find people don't have access to even smaller parcels to plant, very simple things for themselves.
It's worth mentioning here that when we say north and south, we're talking about the span of 40 kilometers.
Yes, yes.
In miles, I think around 25 miles, right? So
yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, it's amazing that we're talking about this spread in north, but because It's that densely populated, has that many refugee camps and so on. So you can really easily write off people in the refugee. And I had this conversation. Actually, these become more pronounced once you see the work international organization, other organizations try to create some impact. They would target, they call these marginal groups that they cannot target because there is no amount for them. There's no amount of work that actually can get them to the level of food production in a sense. Right. So they would target groups that have, in a sense, and in the context of Gaza strip is weird to say, but in a sense, some wealth to sit on, some lands to sit on that actually can, you know, put some birds on the roof to produce or actually plant this extra area. Well, it would take a lot more effort to actually make somebody from the refugee camp productive in that sense. So that actually builds on top and makes the stratification, the social stratification much worse in Gaza Strip, unfortunately.
Thanks, Mohammad. We have 10 minutes left, 9 minutes actually. And I have 3 questions here. One of them is for both of you. So I'd start with this question, and it would be great if Asmaa can answer. So the question basically is from Dallas Robinson, and Dallas thanks you for your input, and is asking you to speak about any agricultural cooperative practices rooted in or practiced around agriculture in Gaza and Palestine overall. So projects and initiatives that are ongoing and they're trying to address some of these issues that we talked about. So if you can take like 2 minutes each to answer this question, and then we can go back to the other 2.
Yeah, I think it's important to look at like cooperatives work in Palestine, and I think honestly believe that in the West Bank, the cooperative work and space is more well developed compared to Gaza, but that's also due like to different factors. And I'll just give an example of like a farmer cooperative in Khan Younis. The owner actually was showing me receipts of like, you know, that he used to, the cooperative used to issue in 1956. And that cooperative has been in existence even before 1948. Now, they were doing a lot of agricultural work and supporting farmers in the area of Khan Younis. Now, the challenge is the more we have like aid in Gaza, the more disruption to the cooperative work is happening. And the trend that we are seeing is that cooperative to some extent are becoming a small NGOs with like lots of like power influence into them. But there is also other barriers to the cooperatives, particularly agricultural cooperatives in terms of Gaza and in terms of like, you know, trading their products outside Gaza and selling. And I shared the example of the tomato. So, you know, lots of like agricultural farmers, they plant tomato to be traded like either with the West Bank or, you know, other places. Now, the Israelis put restriction on like, you know, the selling of tomato that you have to remove the green part of the tomato. Now that reduces the shelf of the tomato like by half. Now, if you have this tomato staying at the crossing for a couple of days, then you will have a huge losses that is happening. But what we are seeing is that there is a lot of like aid money trying to support agriculture in Palestine. The initiative that really look at agroecology in Gaza, it's a very individual initiatives. So we have like examples of people supporting like local seeds production and local seeds banks, and we have other people like, you know, trying like particularly young people organizing around cooperative work. But to be honest, and Mohammad can like reflect on that, I think the work in the West Bank is much more mature compared to Gaza. And that's also related to the extent to which there are spaces for building such a movement in Gaza and accessing a lot of knowledge into that.
Thank you so much, Asmaa. Mohammad?
Yeah, just quickly, I do believe there are some cooperatives in a different sense, like the strawberry cooperatives, the infamous sort of production cooperative that, you know, Dr. Aga called it a mafia or something, because it's his history goes a long time before that. And I've met folks like Jehad and so on that do cooperatives in the north, in Gaza Strip, and it's still hard because the practices around cooperatives and so on, I think Asmaa hit the nail on the head, like the NGO, the intervention, the NGO sector and so on actually sort of prevents that sort of natural development, because there are a lot of agricultural folks in the agricultural sector that the work that we do actually stems, and I think Del's question was asking about the sort of cultural practices. Like we have this our own idea where people basically come together to help and work together in a sense, and to put their resources together, and their resources used to be labor. And there's a lot of production cooperatives across the West Bank, across, yeah, there's a couple in Gaza. And actually part of the work that we're seeking to accomplish in Gaza Strip when we're there is to actually create this consumer cooperative, since there isn't a single operating consumer cooperative in Gaza Strip to support farmers. That was pretty astonishing to me. But in the West Bank, for example, there are younger folks that are attempting this, I would say, cooperative 2.0 sort of version of it, like in the area where Musliman is operating. We have other folks around us in the West Ramallah area. We're trying to put our efforts together and so on, actually make these individual cooperatives to come and band together and create like a sort of a bigger band consumer cooperative. So the cooperative practices and so on, they really are facing that sort of limitation. We are under-resourced, and somebody was asking if you need help. We need a ton of help for actually to put more effort into that sector and actually make education and work. There's a ton of things that we can talk about related to the cooperatives and how politically exigent, like the importance of the cooperative as a political space is really undervalued in this work. So we need to sort of touch on these a lot more, hopefully in other conversations.
Mohammad, there is a follow-up question, and thanks for that, about from Steve Tamari, who's asking, how can we learn about the Gaza Minister of Agriculture's plan for agricultural resistance? And I hope it's not a secret, right? Like it's
No. I believe you actually can go online and pick it up. And this is the unfortunate part. Like this is valuable to me because it's a hard copy, but like that you can, I believe I could find it online and send it to you. And this is, I've been trying to basically say, like, we have been talking about Fayyadism as a model, as a negative model in Palestine and so on.
In reference to the Prime Minister Salam Fayyad.
Salam Fayyad, like since basically the post-second Intifada sort of, economic infrastructure. And I really believe what Dr. Mohammad Abu Ramadan have created since 2006, like the work. And I mean, it didn't take its full course. Things changed, and experiments like the organic agriculture experiment station that was in Gaza Strip and was an amazing experiment. Actually, a lot of the olive oil production today comes from, you can read it verbatim in the strategy of planting all these trees to make this palm trees. You can drive down Salahuddin and see the change, see the Kenya trees removed, and actually instead of them like all these palm and olive trees, you will see all these the things in effect, the strategy, like what Dr. Agha has put in place. And I wish that we talk about this model going forward, because this is what sovereignty is about, is actually picking these successful models, even in a partial way, and actually projecting them forward and using them as blueprint, not the other way around,
I have a question for Asmaa, and then we will wrap up at 1:05. So we're going a little bit over by 5 minutes. So thanks for staying with us. Asmaa, the question is from Steve Tamari, and he asks, if agriculture is so important culturally for Palestinians, what are the means of transferring this knowledge from earlier generations that practiced a holistic, distinctly Palestinian brand of farming to a younger generation that lacks this expertise?
Oh, that's the million-dollar question, Jehad.
It has to be answered in 2 minutes, though. But
Yes, very shortly. Unfortunately, there is a huge lack in spaces where such knowledge is being transferred across generation, because what happens is that the older generation tried to actually push their children into education and, like, you know, pursuing jobs that is more stable than agriculture. So like our parents and and even our generation has shied away from agriculture, and suddenly like that kind of holistic knowledge that existed within the older generation has not been transferred, neither through like knowledge sharing at schools level, neither through like programs that exist within like civil society spaces that really looks at agriculture from a political lens, but also from, you know, ecological lens, and sharing it with the children that is very indigenous. The knowledge that is being shared is very like driven by like you know, climate change and like very Western narratives and concepts that does not reflect like the proverbs that our grandparents used to predict you know, climate change, or talks about like agricultural season and calendar. So unfortunately, we are losing that kind of knowledge. We have the last remaining generation in agriculture, and that have like young people joining them. They are joining out of necessity, Jehad, rather than like a strong convention of like how agriculture is one way of Palestinian liberation. And I think there is a lot of spaces that we need to work on it and create it in order to ensure that there is a generational transformation and transfer of knowledge.
thank you so much, Asmaa. I appreciate answering the million-dollar question in such a profound way in less than 2 minutes. Before I end, there are multiple questions that basically that can be summed up in the eternal question of what is to be done. And so, if you have anything to answer this question, as you know, as related to what can be done to support this work, these initiatives, these efforts. So please go ahead, and I will conclude shortly. So thank you. Mohammad?
Well, you can always go visit the Suleiman farm or contact us personally. And so, as I said, like briefly, we're under-resourced because a lot of this work has been channeled basically through other channels that, instead of enriching and encouraging not only the private sector, creating this space of commons, and that's where the co-ops actually fit and so on. Palestine in general, the fight for Palestine started as a fight for the commons. The villages and so on that were basically defended, we held them in common. The waqfs that we fought for, we held them in common. These are the values that we held as a society and so on, beyond the little techniques and so on that are important and so on. But like, we need to go back not only to the techniques, but to the values that we have. And we need to create that sphere and that work of that is based on our values and basically reclaiming Palestine to the commons that are shared between us as Palestinians is one of the central, most important things that we need to do. But we need the resources to actually get there. We need to invest these resources in education, to get people to invite people over to this space to do the work. So there is a lot of uplifting examples of basically things that we succeeded in accomplishing, but we need to continue down, just bite down and actually continue down that path further and further, but basically with things that we value as a society, as a group of people together.
Thank you so much, Mohammad. Asmaa, if you have any final words.
Yeah, I just want to build on what Mohammad has said. And I think really leveraging these success stories and the examples and also linking them in a very structural way to the Palestinian histories and even the farmers' histories in Palestine is something very important. And I really view like schools and education as one aspect and one area that really could be an entry point into linking that. But also as Palestinians across, like, Gaza and West Bank and East Jerusalem, we need to do our also homework of like connecting these different initiatives together in a holistic way, so that we present different aspects of like Palestinian narrative when it comes to agriculture. And the last thing is really, it's sickening how much depoliticized agriculture is being viewed. And I think we really need to bring to the conversation how any agricultural intervention cannot be addressed in a depoliticized way, and any developmental efforts need to talk about what like food sovereignty rather than food security. That has been the conversation that we talk about like most of the time. So there are so many changes, so many levels, civil society, but also public and also international spheres, and just, one of the things that has been supportive for a lot of Palestinian farmers is that the global movement and solidarity for farmers is a great example that we can learn from and build upon.
Asmaa, Abu Mezied, Mohammad, Abujayyab, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you so much for this great conversation. And this won't be the last time we host you, so I think there will be more opportunities in the future to expand on some of these topics. I'm grateful for the audience, for everyone who attended our event today on behalf of Adalah Justice Project's Gaza is Palestine campaign and the American Friends Service Committee's Gaza Unlocked campaign. Thank you so much for joining us today. And my answer to the question of what can be done, stay in touch, follow our work. We're working on building this bridge between our movement here and with Palestinians in Gaza who are working to uplift various aspects of life there and empower our communities and work together towards ending the blockade, ending Gaza's isolation, and reconnecting Gaza to the broader struggle for freedom and liberation and return in Palestine. And until our next event, thank you so much. Be well, and again, thank you so much for participating today and for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you.